It wasn't the wind, nor the snow, but a deep tremor, a heartbeat from the frozen earth that Yelena felt in her bones, an icy premonition only she could perceive. The biting air of the blinding blizzard carried the metallic scent of giant predators, and panic chilled the deaf elder's blood as she realized it wasn't one, but 7 colossal white figures approaching the sleeping herd, moving like ghosts in the storm. With her calloused hands trembling and snow whipping her wrinkled face, she knew that the life of her entire village depended on a single act of silent courage against beasts that could tear the darkness to shreds. But how could she stop what she couldn't hear? The tremor intensified, a somber echo vibrating from the frozen ground to the core of her being. Yelena clenched her fists, her wrinkled skin stretched taut over her knuckles, and the initial panic gave way to fierce determination. There was no time for fear. The lives of her people, the warmth of their huts, the laughter of her grandchildren, everything depended on that herd, on those reindeer that were now mere dark specks in the white darkness, oblivious to the creeping danger. She turned sharply, her blue eyes, though clouded by age, sweeping over the small cluster of tents and shelters half buried in the snow. The flickering lights of a few hearths barely managed to pierce the dense curtain of the blizzard. No one else seemed to feel what she felt. No one else understood the impending catastrophe. How to warn? How to explain the invisible and inaudible threat approaching when the very air seemed to scream with the wind's fury? Yelena ran, or rather shuffled with surprising urgency for her age, against the force of the gale. Her frail body was a point of resistance against nature's fury. She needed help, but knew that understanding would be a luxury. She spotted Narim, her eldest grandson, a young man of 20 winters, strong and agile, who was trying to secure a loose tarp at the entrance of his own tent. Narim's face was covered in ice. His eyes squinted to protect himself from the biting snow. Yelena grabbed Narim's arm with unexpected strength for her age. He turned, startled, and saw the grave and urgent expression on his grandmother's face. Her lips moved, but no sound came out, only the mimicry of words that Narim, accustomed to her deafness, tried to decipher. Bears. 7. Herd. Yelena gestured frantically towards the tundra, her fingers pointing into the white void. She stomped her foot on the ground, trying to convey the vibration that consumed her. Narim frowned, understanding, struggling to break through the barrier of wind and disbelief. 7 bears? In this storm, so close to the village? It was almost unthinkable. He looked in the direction she pointed, but saw only the blind fury of the snow. Grandmother, what? He began to ask, but Yelena interrupted him with a firm gesture, pulling him closer, almost dragging him. She led him to a small storehouse of furs and tools, a place that held the secrets of her ancestral wisdom. There, among piles of leather and bones, she fumbled until she found what she was looking for. A large, ancient, sacred reindeer hide drum and a set of metal bells used in rituals to ward off evil spirits and, in ancient times, predators. Narim watched, confused. You want me to make noise, grandmother? For what? Yelena shook her head, impatient. It wasn't about making just any noise. It was about feeling the noise. She indicated the drum, then the ground, and then the herd. She needed Narim and other young people to use these instruments, not to scare the bears with the sound they themselves would make, but to create specific vibrations at strategic points in the topography that would disorient the white behemoths. She couldn't hear, but she knew the bears would feel it. It was a risky plan, one that depended on the blind faith of others in her unique perception. The elder closed her eyes for an instant, feeling the heavy pulse of the bears drawing even closer, like hammers beating in the earth's heart. She opened them again, and in them was a light of unwavering determination. She picked up one of the bells and swung it near Narim's face, who heard the sharp clang. Yelena then placed it on the ground and with a finger indicated a sequence of drum beats, an irregular cadence that she knew would create a specific resonance in the soil. Narim, though still hesitant, began to understand the gravity of the situation through his grandmother's silent urgency. He nodded, his eyes fixed on hers, promising to follow her instructions, however strange they seemed. Yelena knew that the first part of her plan was in motion. Now, it was a race against time and the cold. Narim felt a chill, not only from the cold, but from the responsibility his grandmother had placed on his shoulders. 7 giant, hungry polar bears were terrifying. Yelena's determination, however, outweighed any doubt. He nodded, a silent commitment. He turned, snow whipping his face, and ran, hunched against the wind towards the neighboring tents. Convincing the others would be arduous. How to explain something invisible and inaudible? He sought out Cyan, his cousin, a strong and skeptical young man. Narim grabbed him, pulling him out of his tent. "Bears! 7! Grandmother felt them!" Narim shouted, almost voiceless, overcoming the wind's roar. Cyan frowned. 7 bears? Narim, are you mad? No one saw anything." The disbelief was clear, but Narim's panic made him hesitate. Yelena, with agility, appeared beside them. Her presence was imposing. She couldn't hear, but she felt Cyan's hesitation. With a firm gesture, she took her grandson's hand and placed it on the reindeer drum. She struck it with her palm, a strong beat, and pointed to the ground, the tundra, and the herd. Her eyes conveyed an unquestionable truth. Cyan felt the deep vibration of the drum, an echo in his bones. His grandmother asked them to feel, not to hear. It was the ancestral method. The urgency on Yelena's wrinkled face was a silent scream that pierced the soul. "She wants us to use this to drive away the bears." "With vibrations," Narim explained, his voice firmer. "She feels they are close." Gradually, other young people joined, drawn by the elder. Ayana, a young huntress with piercing eyes, who had always admired Yelena, did not doubt. "If Elder Yelena says so, they are coming," Ayana declared, her voice firm, cutting through the hesitation. "What should we do?" Yelena smiled slightly at Ayana. She handed her a bell, indicating to Narim and Cyan to take the others. With precise gestures, she pointed to different directions at the edge of the village. She indicated that they should spread out, forming a semicircle around the herd. The elder demonstrated the cadence of the drumbeats, an irregular pulse that would create the right vibrations in the ground. The bells would create a sharp contrast, which the bears would feel as a shock. It was a silent symphony of danger and hope. The group of 10 young people began to move, each with an instrument. Ayana was the first, following Yelena. Narim and Cyan followed her. Snow fell, the wind howled, but the team advanced, guided by the elder. The tremor in Yelena's bones intensified. Time was running out. The icy wind howled, a relentless tormentor breaking exposed skin and stealing breath. Yelena, with Ayana by her side, led the small group of young people, each hunched against the white fury, their ancestral instruments firmly clutched. The elder moved with surprising agility, her feet finding the way under the deep snow, guided by an internal compass that others did not possess. She felt the topography of the terrain as if it were an extension of her own body, each elevation, each depression, a strategic point in her silent plan. Narim and Cyan followed closely, their faces pale and tense, their eyes fixed on their grandmother's determined silhouette. Disbelief still battled urgency, but faith in Yelena's wisdom was stronger. They couldn't see the bears, nor hear the growl that imagination painted, but the persistent tremor Yelena had transmitted to them, a distant echo from the earth, was undeniable proof. The cold froze their eyelids, and each step was a battle against the rapidly accumulating snow, threatening to swallow their ankles. Yelena stopped abruptly, raising a wrinkled hand. Ayana, attentive, also stopped, her eyes sweeping the white darkness. The elder gestured to Ayana, indicating a slightly elevated point to the right, where a cluster of rocks partially covered by snow offered a solid base. There, the drum's vibration would be amplified, resonating through the frozen ground. Ayana nodded, her expression serious, and ran to the position, the bell in her hand seeming tiny against the vastness of the storm. Next, Yelena pointed to Narim and Sayan, indicating opposite positions, forming a protective arc around the herd, which still remained in its vulnerable stillness just a few hundred meters ahead, almost invisible in the blizzard. The other young people spread out, following the elders' silent instructions, their bodies becoming small, isolated points in the white immensity. To each, Yelena had transmitted the exact cadence of the beats, the intensity and rhythm that she knew would be effective. The tremor in Yelena's bones was now a dull, continuous roar. The bears were incredibly close. She could feel the colossal mass of their bodies moving, hunger pulsing in their heavy paws, sinking into the snow. It was time. With a final gesture, she signaled to Narim, who was closest, to begin. Narim, his gloved hands trembling, raised the reindeer drum. He took a deep breath, the icy air burning his lungs, and began to beat, following the rhythm his grandmother had demonstrated. Thump, 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 thump. The muffled sound of the drum was almost inaudible in the storm, but the vibration it generated was palpable, a pulse spreading through the ground. Sayan began next, and soon the other young people joined, each in their position, creating a symphony of beats and clangs that, though faint to human ears in the storm, was an invisible and powerful force to the ground. Yelena closed her eyes again, concentrating. She could feel it. The vibrations of the drums and bells clashed with the vibrations of the bears. There was a hesitation in the predator's movements. One of them, the largest, stopped. She felt its confusion, a wave of uncertainty propagating through the ice. The other bears also slowed their pace, their heavy steps now more hesitant, as if the ground beneath their paws was behaving strangely, sending contradictory messages. The elder opened her eyes, a glimmer of silent triumph in them. The plan was working. The sonic traps, which she couldn't hear but could masterfully feel and manipulate, were disorienting the white behemoths. But the battle was far from over. The bears were hungry, and the initial confusion could quickly turn into fury. Ayana, in her position, struck the bell with determination, feeling the echo of the vibrations in the ground. Narim, exhausted but driven by Yelena's silent urgency, continued to beat the drum, his muscles burning. The group of young people, now an extension of the elder's will, maintained the cadence, an invisible barrier against the approaching death. Hope, fragile as a snowflake, began to form in the heart of the village. Hope, fragile as a snowflake, began to form in the heart of the village. Yelena felt this change, not as a sound, but as a slight alteration in the general vibration, a faint relief in the tension that permeated the icy air. The bears, for a brief moment, had retreated, their heavy steps now more distant, more uncertain. She felt their confusion, a disturbance in the predatory rhythm that had alarmed her. It was as if the ground, which had previously offered them a clear path, now whispered danger, an undeniable warning. But the elder knew that hunger was a powerful force, and the desperation of extreme cold could overcome any temporary disorientation. The white behemoths would not give up easily. She could feel their primal instincts fighting against the strange sensation that the vibrations of the drums and bells provoked. A deep growl, though inaudible to her, resonated through the ice, a tremor that Yelena felt as a wave of rising fury. The bears regrouped, seeking a new approach, a weak point in the young people's invisible barrier. Narim, his fingers numb and his arm muscles burning, continued to beat the drum. Icy sweat ran down his forehead, mixing with the snowflakes whipping his face. He could barely see Cyan or Ayana, but the rhythmic cadence of the other instruments, muffled by the wind, reminded him that he was not alone. Faith in Yelena was what kept him moving, a stubborn flame against despair. He looked at his grandmother's silhouette, which remained motionless, her eyes half closed, as if listening to the heart of the tundra. Ayana, in turn, felt exhaustion tightening its grip. The bell in her hand felt heavier and heavier, and the cold penetrated her gloves, freezing her fingers. She remembered the stories Yelena told in her childhood about how the ancient Yakuts connected with the earth, read its signs, felt its pulsations. At that moment, she wasn't just striking the bell, she was trying to feel, to understand what Yelena felt. And to her surprise, a slight vibration, different from that of the bell, manifested in her palms, a distant echo of the bears, confirming the threat. Yelena perceived the change in the bears. They were moving in a different pattern, circling, trying to flank the group of young people. One of them, the largest and most audacious, began to advance again, with renewed determination, ignoring the initial confusion. The elder gestured frantically to Narim, indicating that he should change the intensity of the beats, making them faster and more erratic, concentrating the vibration in a specific area. She pointed to the spot where she felt the lead bears advance. Narim, without hesitation, obeyed. He changed the rhythm, beating the drum with renewed fury, his arms aching but his will unbroken. Ayana and the others, perceiving the urgency in Yelena's gestures, adjusted their rhythms, creating a wall of intensified vibrations at the point of attack. The lead bear, which had already advanced a few steps, stopped again, shaking its colossal head as if trying to rid itself of an unbearable hum that only it felt. The ground beneath its paws seemed to tremble with an invisible fury, a barrier it could not cross. The village, by a thread, continued to fight. The lead bear, which had already advanced a few steps, stopped again, shaking its colossal head as if trying to rid itself of an unbearable hum that only it felt. The ground beneath its paws seemed to tremble with an invisible fury, a barrier it could not cross. The village, by a thread, continued to fight. The beast let out a deep growl, a tremor that Yelena felt as a wave of frustration and anger reverberating through the ice. The other 6 bears, equally disoriented, moved with hesitation, their massive bodies seeming lost in the white darkness, unable to locate the source of the strange disturbance that prevented them from reaching the tempting scent of the herd. Yelena, her face marked by wind and age, felt the change in the predator's behavior. The initial confusion was giving way to dangerous irritation. They would not retreat easily. Their hunting instincts were powerful, and hunger a constant torment. She needed to intensify the strategy, transform disorientation into a flight impulse. With a swift movement, she pointed to Narim, gesturing for him to move a few meters to the left, towards a small depression in the terrain. There, the resonance of the beats would be different, more concentrated, creating a sensation of a vibratory whole. Narim, exhausted but his mind sharpened by adrenaline, understood his grandmother's intention. His muscles screamed for rest, but the image of the defenseless herd and Yelena's silent determination propelled him. He dragged himself through the deep snow, the heavy drum in his hands, to the new position. He began to beat again, following the new cadence Yelena had indicated with precise gestures, a rhythm that seemed to pull the ground downwards. Ayana and Cyan, observing the change, adjusted their positions and rhythms too, creating a network of vibrations that surrounded the bears, subtly pushing them away. The elder closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the silent symphony her young people were creating. It was a delicate dance of strength and precision. The vibrations of the drums and bells now not only confused, but seemed to guide the bears, pushing them towards the edge of the protected area. She felt one of the bears stumble, its paw sinking into a spot where the vibration was most intense, almost as if the ground had given way. A low moan, a tremor of discomfort emanated from the beast. Ayana, in her position, felt the intense cold freeze her bones, but the sight of Yelena, still and unyielding, was a beacon. She struck the bell with renewed force, imagining each clang as a small shockwave repelling the monsters. She didn't see the bears, but she felt the tension in the air, the pulsating energy of the invisible battle. Her fingers were numb, but with each beat she felt a deeper connection to the earth, to her elder's wisdom. Cyan, in turn, fought against fatigue and doubt. He couldn't feel the vibrations like Yelena, but the faith of Narim and Ayana and the urgency in his grandmother's eyes were enough. He beat the drum with controlled fury, his arms aching, but his spirit refusing to yield. He thought of his little sister, sleeping in the tent, and of the safety of the herd that guaranteed everyone's life. This was his motivation, his strength. Yelena opened her eyes. The lead bear was retreating, slowly, but retreating. The others followed, their colossal forms disappearing into the darkness of the blizzard, towards the more distant tundra. The elder felt the diminishing, monstrous vibrations, a slow and gradual relief spreading through the ground. They were moving away. It wasn't a complete victory, not yet. Hunger would bring them back if the plan wasn't executed perfectly. But the first and most dangerous advance had been contained. The village had resisted. An almost inaudible sigh escaped Yelena's lips, a mixture of exhaustion and gratitude. The silent battle was turning in her favor, a testament to resilience and ancestral wisdom. The cautious hope that had settled over the village was as fragile as the ice beneath their feet. Yelena felt it, a slight decrease in pressure, but also a persistent shadow of danger. The bears had retreated, yes, but they hadn't disappeared. Their vibrations, though more distant, still pulsed in the tundra like a hungry heart refusing to die. She knew the victory was only partial, a postponement. Hunger and cold were relentless allies of the predators, and they wouldn't give up as long as the scent of the herd still drifted on the icy air, a promise of survival. The elder closed her eyes again, concentrating. She felt the white behemoth circling, testing the invisible barrier the young people had erected. They were looking for a breach, a weak point in the silent symphony that disoriented them. Suddenly, a more intense chill ran down her spine. One of the vibrations, more subtle and cunning, began to deviate from the pattern. It wasn't the lead bear, but one of the younger ones, perhaps more impetuous or less affected by the initial confusion. It was circumventing the densest area of vibrations, using a rocky formation and a deep snow trench as cover, a path the young people couldn't adequately cover with their dispersed instruments. The bear was advancing stealthily towards the herd's most vulnerable flank. Yelena felt panic rise in her throat, a tight knot she swallowed with difficulty. There was no time to alert Narim or the others with complex gestures. The distance was great, the wind howled, and the bear was moving with alarming speed, driven by desperate hunger. She needed to act, and fast. Her eyes opened, fixed on the white darkness where she felt the predators advance. Without a second thought, Yelena began to move. She ran, or rather slid and shuffled with surprising speed for her age, towards the point where she felt the bear flanking. Her small figure was a point of determination against the blizzard's fury. The wind whipped her body, threatening to knock her down with every step. But she refused to yield. Narim, exhausted and his eyes half closed from the cold, noticed his grandmother's abrupt movement. His drum beats faltered for an instant. He saw Yelena move away from the center of the formation, running into the darkness, into danger. An icy fear invaded him. "Grandmother, no!" he tried to shout, but his voice was swallowed by the wind. Ayana and Cyan also noticed. Ayana, with a muffled cry, began to run after the elder, the bell still in her hand, but the deep snow and wind slowed her down. Yelena reached the edge of the snow trench, a point where the terrain curved abruptly. She could feel the bear a few meters away, its colossal mass approaching. There was no time for elaborate traps. She needed something that would create an intense and localized vibration, a direct shock. Her eyes swept the ground. There, half buried in the snow, was a large, smooth, heavy rock that would serve her purpose. With a Herculean effort that made her muscles scream, Yelena knelt and began to strike the rock against the frozen ground with all the strength she had left. It wasn't a rhythm, but a series of violent and erratic blows, each sending a shockwave through the ice. She couldn't hear the impact, but she felt the rock vibrate in her gloved hands, and the ground respond with a deep tremor. The bear, which was about to emerge from the trench, stopped abruptly. Yelena felt its confusion turn into a startle. The direct vibration, so close, so unexpected, was like a physical blow. The beast let out a grunt of surprise and retreated, its heavy paw slipping in the snow. Ayana arrived, panting beside Yelena, her eyes wide with terror and admiration. She saw her grandmother, small and frail, facing the invisible behemoth with indomitable courage. Yelena continued to strike the rock, her arms trembling, her body exhausted, but her will unyielding. She could feel the bear moving away, its presence diminishing in the darkness, but in doing so, she had exposed herself, moving away from the protection of the others. The danger was still present, and she was now in a much more vulnerable position, alone in the white vastness, with the storm's fury and the threat of the other bears around her. The village, in turn, continued to fight, but Yelena's sacrifice had become the new turning point. Ayana, her heart pounding, saw Yelena, small and hunched against the wind's fury, continue to strike the rock against the ground. The elder was exhausted, her movements slow and painful, but the determination on her wrinkled face was stronger than the storm. Ayana felt the vibration of the rock's last strike, a tremor that spread through her own hands and up her arms, confirming that the bear had moved away. But the joy of this small triumph was quickly replaced by an icy terror. They were alone, exposed, far from the protection of the other young people. Ayana looked into the white darkness that surrounded them, trying to discern the silhouettes of the other bears, but the relentless blizzard swallowed everything. Narim, at a considerable distance, watched with a heavy heart. He had seen his grandmother run, a tiny point of courage in the white immensity, and now he saw her there, with Ayana, isolated. Fear for Yelena's safety struck him hard, more intense than the cold that numbed his limbs. He knew the elder had acted on instinct, to protect the herd, but now she herself was in danger. Cyan, beside him, had wide eyes, his breath caught in his throat. "We have to go to them!" Cyan shouted, his voice almost inaudible against the wind's howl, but the urgency was clear in his eyes. Narim nodded, the decision made. He couldn't leave his grandmother and Ayana alone. Yelena, though exhausted, felt the tundra beneath her feet. The bear's vibrations, though more distant, were still there, a menacing murmur that prevented her from relaxing. She felt Ayana's presence beside her, the young huntress panting, but firm. The elder touched Ayana's arm, a gesture of recognition and warning. She pointed in the direction from which she felt the other bears regrouping, and then gestured for Ayana to strike the bell forcefully, but intermittently, creating pulses of vibration that could confuse the predators about their exact location. Ayana understood. She raised the bell, her fingers numb, and began to strike it, concentrating all her energy into each clang, feeling the vibrations spread through the ground. Meanwhile, Narim and Cyan began to move, struggling through the deep snow. They signaled to the other young people, who also perceived the critical situation. The decision was unanimous. They needed to approach Yelena and Ayana, reinforce the barrier of vibrations, and drive the bears away. The risk was immense, for moving meant reducing the herd's cover, but Yelena's life was paramount. Narim, with the drum in his hands, began to beat a stronger and more constant rhythm, a silent call for unity, a promise of protection. Cyan, his heart in his mouth, followed him closely, his eyes fixed on Yelena's silhouette. Yelena felt the change in vibrations. Narim and Cyan were approaching, and with them the strength of the other young people. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her cracked lips. Human connection, family loyalty, was a force as powerful as the vibrations she manipulated. She felt the bears, now more cautious, but still persistent. They were being pushed back, but not defeated. The elder knew the battle wasn't won, but she was no longer alone. Ayana, by her side, struck the bell with fierce determination, her eyes fixed on Yelena's, absorbing her courage. The village, through its young people, united, transforming the sacrifice of one into a collective effort of survival. The cold bit, but the warmth of unity began to warm their hearts. The elder raised a hand, signaling Ayana to slow the bell's rhythm, indicating they should conserve their last strengths. She felt that the bears were moving even further away, their vibrations becoming fainter. It was a moment of respite, fragile and temporary, but a respite. Narim and Cyan finally reached Yelena and Ayana, their faces marked by exhaustion and relief. Narim placed a hand on his grandmother's shoulder, a gesture of affection and reverence. He didn't need words. The message of gratitude and concern was clear in his tear-filled eyes. The village had resisted once again, united against nature's fury. Narim and Cyan, panting, finally joined Yelena and Ayana. The relief on their faces was palpable, mixed with the exhaustion that weighed on their shoulders. Narim, his eyes moist, placed a hand on his grandmother's wrinkled shoulder, a silent gesture that spoke of gratitude and reverence. Ayana, still holding the bell, watched Yelena with deep admiration, feeling the warmth of the unity that enveloped them. The elder, despite the visible weariness in her features, maintained an upright posture, her eyes fixed on the white darkness that still held the threat. She felt the bear's vibrations, now more distant, an almost imperceptible murmur spreading through the ice. They hadn't left, only retreated. Hunger and cold were relentless, and they would return. With a slow gesture, Yelena indicated for Narim to approach, and then for Ayana and Cyan. She touched the ground with the tip of her foot, making a circular motion, and then pointed to the herd, which remained huddled and frightened. Her message was clear. The immediate protection had worked, but lasting safety would require more. The herd needed to be moved, taken to a safer refuge, where the natural topography could serve as an additional barrier against the predators. Narim, though exhausted, nodded. He understood the urgency. Moving hundreds of reindeer in the midst of an apocalyptic blizzard would be a monumental task, almost impossible, but everyone's life depended on it. Ayana stepped forward, her voice hoarse from the cold. "Where to, elder?" she asked, trying to guess Yelena's intention. The elder pointed east towards a rocky elevation, barely discernible in the darkness, known as the Wind's Shelter. It was a place where the rocks formed a natural semicircle, offering some protection against the wind, and more importantly against the bears, as access was more restricted. Cyan, who had been silent until then, felt a shiver. The distance there was considerable, and the terrain treacherous, but the determination in Yelena's eyes was contagious. "We need everyone," Narim said, his voice firm despite his exhaustion. "The other young people, the herders, we need to guide them." Yelena nodded, her eyes conveying the same urgency. She gestured for Narim and Cyan to go ahead, alerting the others and preparing the herd for movement. Ayana would remain with her to maintain a vibratory watch and help guide the animals. The plan was risky, each step in the deep snow a challenge, but hope once fragile, now transformed into unwavering determination. As Narim and Sayan moved away, their figures quickly disappearing into the blizzard, Yelena and Ayana prepared themselves. The elder touched the ground again, feeling the persistence of the bear's vibrations, which seemed to stir with a new fury, as if they had perceived the imminent escape of their prey. She gestured to Ayana, indicating that she should strike the bell with a more constant and gentle rhythm, creating a vibratory curtain that could disguise the herd's movement. Ayana, her fingers numb, obeyed, feeling the connection between the sound and the earth, an invisible dance of protection. The elder closed her eyes for an instant, concentrating on the silent symphony of the tundra. She felt the strong, beating hearts of the approaching young people, the agitation of the herd, and the persistent threat of the bears. The journey would be long and dangerous, but the unity of their village, ancestral wisdom, and the courage of each individual were the most powerful weapons they possessed. The cold bit at their skin, but the warmth of hope and solidarity warmed their souls, propelling them to the next stage of the battle for survival. Yelena opened her eyes, a glimmer of resilience in them. The village would move, and they would win. Yelena opened her eyes, a glimmer of resilience in them. The village would move, and they would win. The elder gestured to Ayana, indicating it was time to begin. Ayana, her fingers numb, raised the bell and began to strike it softly, a constant rhythm spreading through the ground, a vibratory curtain to mask the imminent movement. The wind howled, but the young huntress felt the connection to the earth, an invisible dance of protection. Narim and Sayan, meanwhile, struggled to gather the herders and the other young people. The task was Herculean. The reindeer, frightened by the storm and the predator's presence, were agitated, their hooves nervously striking the ice. The cold of 71 degrees was an enemy as relentless as the bears, freezing nostrils and lungs with every breath. The herders, experienced men and women, but equally exhausted, moved with difficulty in the deep snow. "We need to keep them together," Narim shouted, his voice hoarse as he tried to push a group of stubborn reindeer in the right direction. He felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, everyone's life depending on his ability to lead. Sayan, by his side, used his body to block the escape of some animals, his arms aching, but his eyes fixed on the goal. Yelena, from where she stood, felt the herd's confusion, the vibration of hundreds of hearts beating in unison with fear. She also felt the bears' agitation, their massive presences moving in the darkness, following the herd's scent, but still disoriented by Ayana's vibratory curtain. The elder gestured to Ayana, indicating that she should change the bell's rhythm, making it more irregular, as if the herd were dispersing, a tactic to deceive the predators. Ayana obeyed, her movements precise, despite her exhaustion. She didn't see the bears, but imagined their colossal forms, their noses sniffing the air, trying to decipher the vibratory enigma the elder had created. With each beat, she felt a wave of hope and fear mixing in her chest. Slowly, painfully, the herd began to move. The herders, guided by the young people, formed a human wall, pushing the reindeer eastward towards the wind's shelter. The wind whipped their faces, transforming the snow into ice needles that pierced their skin. Many stumbled, fell, and rose again, the determination in their eyes stronger than the pain. Yelena, with Ayana by her side, walked at the rear, her feet barely touching the ground, but her keen perception sweeping the tundra. She felt every step of the herd, every tremor of the bears, every change in the topography. Suddenly, a stronger vibration caught her attention. One of the bears, the most audacious, was dangerously approaching the herd's left flank, where the vibratory curtain was fainter. It had perceived the maneuver. The elder gestured frantically to Ayana, pointing in the direction of the danger. Ayana, her heart racing, began to strike the bell with renewed fury, concentrating the vibrations at that point. Narim, who was further ahead, felt the change in the bell's rhythm and, without seeing, understood the urgency. He shouted to the herders on the left flank, indicating that they should close ranks. The bear, which was already advancing, stopped again, shaking its head. The intensified vibration, so close, caught it by surprise. It grunted, frustrated, and retreated a few steps, but did not give up. The battle was a delicate dance between the predator's cunning and the village's ancestral wisdom. With each step, hope was renewed, but danger persisted, a constant shadow in the white darkness. The village advanced, united towards the unknown. The wind whipped mercilessly, sculpting the snow into shifting dunes that made every step difficult. The herd, a dark and trembling mass, moved with excruciating slowness. Reindeer sank into the soft snow, hooves struggling for purchase. Determination kept them moving. Yelena, with Ayana by her side, walked at the rear, her eyes fixed on the darkness, mind and body attuned to the tundra. She felt the vibration of the reindeer hooves, an irregular rhythm of fatigue and fear. She felt the persistence of the bears, who seemed to learn and adapt to the vibratory barrier. One of the bears, the leader, proved cunning. Yelena felt its presence, not a direct advance, but a calculated movement, circumventing Ayana's curtain of vibrations. It used depressions and elevations in the terrain, blind spots of perception, to approach. The elder gestured to Ayana, indicating that she should concentrate the bell strikes into short, intense pulses, like warnings, instead of a continuous curtain. Ayana, her lips cracked by the cold, obeyed, feeling the change in her grandmother's strategy and the urgency conveyed. At the front, Narim and Sayan fought against exhaustion. Narim, drum on his back, pushed stubborn reindeer, his hoarse voice encouraging the herders. "We can't stop. The shelter is closer," he shouted. Muscles burned, but the image of Yelena, unyielding, and the responsibility for his village propelled him. Sayan, younger and stronger, cleared a path in the deep snow, using his body as a plow, feeling the weight of exhaustion crushing him. Suddenly, the herd's progress slowed drastically. Ahead, a vast area of accumulated snow, higher and softer, blocked the path. Reindeer sank up to their chests, some stopping, exhausted, refusing to advance. Panic spread, fear reflecting in the herders' faces. It was a natural obstacle, as dangerous as the predators, for it immobilized the prey. Yelena felt the change in the herd's vibrations, confusion, despair. Almost immediately, she felt the acceleration of the bear's vibrations. They had perceived the vulnerability. The leader moved quickly, taking advantage of the standstill. The elder knew there was no time to divert the herd. They needed to cross. With a quick gesture, Yelena indicated to Ayana to stop the bell for an instant. Ayana hesitated, but trusted. Yelena pointed to the deep snow and to Narim's drum. The intention was clear, a powerful and constant vibration to open the way, forcing the reindeer to advance and creating an intense sonic barrier against the bears. Narim, understanding the gesture and the silence of the bell, untied the drum. Sayan helped steady it. Narim struck with unprecedented force, continuous blows, sending shockwaves through the ground. Ayana, beside Yelena, felt the powerful vibration of the drum, an invisible wall against snow and predators. She resumed the bell, frantically, concentrating the vibrations to guide the reindeer and repel the bears. The village, caught between snow and predators, fought, driven by Yelena's wisdom and unity. The wind's shelter was a distant promise, but with each beat, they drew closer to hope. The elder knew that the climax of the struggle was imminent. The elder knew that the climax of the struggle was imminent. The accumulated snow, an insurmountable barrier for the exhausted herd, was now the stage where life or death would be decided. Yelena felt the bear's fury growing, their vibrations becoming denser, more coordinated. The leader, with frightening intelligence, seemed to have understood the herd's paralysis and was orchestrating an attack. She felt two bears moving on one flank, while the leader prepared for a frontal assault, taking advantage of the confusion. The icy air cut at her throat, but the elder could not afford to falter. Ayana, by her side, struck the bell with an energy that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. But the vibratory curtain was no longer enough to contain the predator's ferocity. Narim, at the front, struck the drum with desperate force, trying to clear a path in the soft snow, but the reindeer were stuck, their bodies trembling with fear and exhaustion. Cyan, with the herders, struggled to maintain formation, but the mass of animals was disintegrating under the pressure. Yelena closed her eyes for an instant, searching her ancestral memory for a solution. The stories of the ancients, the whispers of the wind that she couldn't hear but felt in every fiber of her being, guided her. She needed something more, something that would strike the bears at their most primitive instinct, a vibration that simulated a danger even greater than hunger. She opened her eyes, fixed on the white darkness. There, to her right, a crack in the ice, almost invisible under the snow, stretched for several meters. It was a treacherous crack, but one that could be used. With an urgent gesture, Yelena pointed to the crack, then to Ayana and the bell. Ayana, seeing the intensity in the elder's eyes, understood immediately. The crack, if struck at the right point, could amplify the bell's vibrations, creating a subterranean roar, a threat that would make the bears retreat. The young huntress ran, her feet sinking into the snow, towards the crack. Yelena felt the lead bear approaching, just a few meters away, its colossal presence vibrating in the ice. There was no time. She knelt, and with her gloved hands, began to strike the snow over the crack with all the strength she had left, creating small but rapid and intense vibrations. It was a signal for Ayana, a point of impact. Ayana reached the crack, her heart beating wildly. She saw the small ripples Yelena created in the snow. With a muffled cry, she raised the bell and struck it with all her might against the edge of the crack. The sound, which she barely heard, transformed into a powerful shockwave that spread through the ice, amplified by the crack. It was as if the earth itself was groaning. The lead bear, which was about to leap, stopped abruptly. Yelena felt its confusion, its predator instinct being overcome by an atavistic fear. The vibration was so intense, so unexpected, that it made it recoil, letting out a grunt of surprise and caution. The other bears, approaching from the flanks, also felt the tremor. Their vibrations diminished, their movements hesitated. Yelena's vibratory trap had worked. Narim, feeling the change in the environment, the decrease in pressure from the bears, understood. He redoubled his drumbeats, now with a new purpose, not only to clear a path, but also to maintain the illusion of imminent danger. Cyan and the herders, invigorated by the unexpected pause, began to push the reindeer with renewed force, taking advantage of the predator's moment of hesitation. The herd, still frightened, began to move again slowly through the deep snow. Yelena, exhausted, felt her body tremble, but a faint smile touched her lips. They had bought time. Ayana, by her side, continued to strike the bell, keeping the earth's voice active. The wind's shelter was now more visible, a dark and promising silhouette in the white darkness. The elder knew that the danger hadn't disappeared, but the village had found new strength, new hope, in the midst of chaos. The climax was unfolding, and Yelena's resilience, combined with her family's courage, was about to turn the tide once and for all. The lead bear, stunned by the sudden and powerful vibration that had erupted from the ice, let out a deep growl, not of fury, but of an ancestral fear. It recoiled, stumbling, its enormous paws slipping in the snow. Ayana, the bell still vibrating in her numb hands, watched the colossal creature retreat, its silhouette quickly disappearing into the white darkness. The other bears, who had felt the amplified tremor, also hesitated. Yelena felt their vibrations become erratic, confused, and then, one by one, they began to diminish, distancing themselves, as if the tundra itself had spoken, warning them not to cross an invisible boundary. A collective sigh of relief, almost inaudible against the wind's howl, swept through the herders. Narim, the drum still in his hands, stopped striking it for an instant, the sudden silence seeming even more intense than the previous sound. He looked at Yelena, his eyes moist with gratitude and admiration. The elder, though exhausted, felt the diminishing threat. The bears were retreating, not for a moment, but decisively, frightened by the earth's voice that she had orchestrated. With a nod, Yelena indicated to Narim to resume the drum's rhythm, but now with a softer and more constant beat, a call of hope. Ayana, her fingers stiff, joined him, the bell clanging in unison, guiding the herd. The accumulated snow, once an insurmountable barrier, seemed less threatening now that the immediate danger had receded. The herders, invigorated by the momentary victory, pushed the reindeer with renewed force. Narim and Sayan, shoulder to shoulder, cleared a path, their bodies hunched against the wind, but their hearts filled with new determination. The wind's shelter, once a distant promise, now seemed closer, its dark rocks beginning to outline themselves in the blizzard's darkness. Yelena, walking at the rear with Ayana, felt every step of the herd, every tremor in the ice. She knew that the struggle hadn't completely ended until they were safe, but most of the danger had been overcome. The connection between her and Ayana, the deaf elder and the young huntress, was a silent dance of trust and wisdom. Ayana, exhausted but with a glimmer in her eyes, continued to strike the bell, her movements a reflection of Yelena's unwavering will. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, the first reindeer began to huddle among the rocks of the wind's shelter. The natural semicircle offered welcome protection against the biting wind, and the steep topography would hinder any new attempts by the bears. Narim and Sayan, with the herders, guided the herd into the refuge, their movements slow and careful. Yelena and Ayana were the last to enter, their bodies trembling from cold and exhaustion. Narim ran to his grandmother, enveloping her in a tight embrace. He didn't need words. The warmth of his body and the strength of his arms spoke volumes of love, gratitude, and relief. Sayan, beside them, touched Ayana's shoulder, a gesture of respect and camaraderie. The herd, finally safe, began to calm down, their bodies huddling against each other for warmth. The blizzard still roared outside, but inside the shelter there was a sense of peace, of victory. Yelena closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of her family's and her village's unity. They had faced nature's fury and the predator's threat, and they had prevailed. True strength, she knew, lay not in sight or hearing, but in the resilience of the human spirit, in ancestral wisdom, and in the unbreakable power of human connection. They were exhausted, but alive, and hope once again bloomed in the icy tundra. They were exhausted, but alive, and hope once again bloomed in the icy tundra. Inside the wind's shelter, the semicircle of rocks offered palpable relief. The wind's howl was still a mournful song outside, but in here the sound was muffled, and the cold, though still intense, did not bite with the same murderous ferocity. The reindeer, huddled together, breathed heavily, their bodies releasing a warmth that, combined with that of the humans, created a faint bubble of life in the heart of the storm. Narim, still embracing Yelena, felt his grandmother's frail body, but also the unwavering strength that emanated from her. He let out a deep sigh, the icy air burning his lungs, and stepped back slightly to look into the elder's eyes. There were no words to express what he felt, only a gaze, full of reverence and a love that went beyond kinship. Yelena, with a gentle smile, touched her grandson's face, her gloved fingers conveying the calm she felt. Ayana, who had approached, felt her body tremble with exhaustion, but a strange warmth coming from the elder enveloped her. She knew she had been a crucial part of that miracle, her fingers still numb from the bell, but her heart vibrating with a silent joy. Sion, beside them, observed the scene, his eyes scanning the tired faces of the herders and the young people. Many cried in silence, tears freezing on their cheeks, a mixture of relief and the sheer exhaustion of having faced death and won. He felt immense pride for his village, for everyone who had fought side by side. Narim's drum, now silent, lay in the snow, a mute testament to the battle. The elder gestured to Narim, indicating it was time to organize the herd and ensure everyone was as protected as possible. The danger from the bears had diminished, but the blizzard was still a threat. Narim nodded, and with Sion by his side, began to guide the herders. They moved slowly, helping the weaker reindeer find the most sheltered spots, sharing blankets, and even their own bodies to warm the younger animals. Yelena, sitting on a rock, felt the earth's vibrations calm. The bears were far away, the lesson of the tundra's voice etched into their instincts. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel the exhaustion that washed over her. It wasn't a weakness, but the price of a hard-won victory. Ayana sat beside her and, without words, took her grandmother's wrinkled hand, squeezing it gently. Night advanced, and the storm, though still strong, seemed to lessen its fury. Inside the wind's shelter, the hearts of the village beat in unison. Survival wasn't just about the herd, it was about the rediscovery of their own strength, of the ancestral wisdom that had been almost forgotten, and of the unity that made them invincible. Yelena had proven that true sight didn't come from the eyes, and true hearing, not from the ears, but from a heart connected to the earth and its people. At dawn, the blizzard began to subside, revealing a white and untouched world. The villagers' faces, though marked by cold and exhaustion, radiated new hope. They had survived the impossible, guided by the deaf elder who felt the world in a way no one else could. The village had been saved, and with it, the certainty that human resilience, altruism, and the connection between them were the greatest riches they possessed, capable of transforming any adversity into an unforgettable triumph. Yelena, observing the safe herd, felt the promise of a new day, a future built on the strength of spirit and the wisdom the tundra had taught. Yelena, observing the safe herd, felt the promise of a new day, a future built on the strength of spirit and the wisdom the tundra had taught. Dawn brought with it an icy clarity, but also a profound peace that spread through the wind's shelter. The wind, once a deafening roar, now blew in soft whispers, and the snow had stopped falling, revealing a pale and immense sky. The first rays of timid golden sun began to paint the edges of the clouds, transforming the monotonous white into a spectacle of pastel hues. The villagers, still wrapped in their furs and blankets, began to stir, one by one, emerging from the precarious warmth of the huddled reindeer and humans. Their faces were marked by cold and vigil, but in their eyes was a renewed light. Narim was the first to rise completely, stretching his aching muscles. He looked at Yelena, who remained seated on her rock, a small and strong silhouette against the vastness of the snow. A slow, reverent smile formed on his lips, and he approached, kneeling before her. He touched his grandmother's wrinkled hand, a gesture of gratitude that transcended any words. Yelena felt her grandson's tremor, not of fear, but of deep emotion. She squeezed his hand, her eyes fixed on the horizon, where the sun began to break through the clouds. Ayana, who had slept huddled beside her grandmother, awoke with Narim's movement. Her young eyes, once full of apprehension, now shone with a new maturity. She rose, feeling her body heavy, but her spirit light. She looked at the bell in her hands, now silent, and then at Yelena, understanding the depth of what they had accomplished together. Sayan, helping the herders check on the reindeer, felt relief spread through the community. The reindeer, though tired, were unharmed. He observed the herd, the source of their life, and realized that true strength lay not only in its robustness, but in the protection that Yelena's wisdom had offered. He felt a lump in his throat, a silent acknowledgement of the debt everyone owed the elder. Slowly, the village began to organize itself. Fires were rekindled, and the scent of herbal tea and dried meat began to spread, an aroma of life and survival. The children, who had been kept silent during the storm, now ran through the snow, their laughter echoing in the air, a sound of hope that warmed hearts. Yelena observed everything, feeling the vibrations of joy and relief. She knew that the threat of the bears had been a catalyst, forcing the village to look inward, to its own resilience and to the wisdom she represented. Ayana approached Yelena, sitting beside her again. She didn't speak, but her presence was a comfort. Yelena touched her granddaughter's face, feeling the youth and strength blossoming within her. Ayana was the future, the bridge between the old and the new, the voice she couldn't have, but which now carried the echo of her wisdom. The village had been saved, not just from cold and hunger, but in a deeper way. It had rediscovered itself. That day was not just the end of a storm, but the beginning of a new era, where the strength of an unbreakable spirit, human connection, and ancestral wisdom would be the pillars of their existence in the vast and unforgiving tundra.